Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we are discussing downtown revitalization funding opportunities with Mary Oakley from the Ohio Development Services Agency. Before we get started, just a few couple housekeeping items to go over. We will be taking questions at the end of today's webinar, but if you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into your chat box and we will get those answered at the end of the webinar for you. Also, if you have any problems during the webinar, more than likely what has happened is your internet connection has been interrupted. So the simplest thing you can do is close down the GoToWebinar software and re-click the link that was sent to you in the email, and that will solve 99% of your problems. Likewise, if you're on the telephone and you're having trouble with your audio, just hang up the phone and recall the number that was provided to you today. So today we are with Mary Oakley, as I mentioned before. Mary is the Community Investment Manager for the Community Development Office at Ohio Development Services. She's been with the organization since 1998, which is pretty impressive, to say the least. And Mary is quite well versed in several areas of community development, but definitely in CDBG funding. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mary. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Devin. Well, welcome everybody and good afternoon. The webinar this afternoon is to discuss downtown funding opportunities through the Ohio Development Services Agency. The majority of our funding comes from the federal government, more specifically the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Larger cities and urban counties receive their community development block grant funding directly from HUD. Those communities use a consolidated planning process to determine how to allocate the funds to meet the greatest needs in their communities in accordance with HUD requirements. Some of those communities use funds for downtown revitalization. Others focus on housing, economic development, community development, and public services projects. The state of Ohio goes through a similar process to allocate funds to rural counties and small cities. And we allocate a small portion of our funds specifically for downtown revitalization projects. If you are an entitlement community and your elected officials do not currently use CDBG funds for downtown revitalization, this webinar may give you an idea as to what the program can do and can establish grounds for a conversation with those elected officials about other opportunities for which they might currently not be taking advantage. This webinar is specifically for Ohio's rural counties and small cities, and we'll discuss what that means in a little bit. But this funding is allocated for a specific number of set communities that qualify under non-entitlement status. So we changed the way we fund downtown revitalization starting in program year 2019. We pulled our long-running comprehensive downtown revitalization program out from under the community development umbrella and restricted the funds for building rehabilitation projects. We also are going to talk a little bit about the critical infrastructure program today, because critical central business district infrastructure projects may qualify for critical infrastructure program funds. Projects that create or retain low and moderate income jobs may also qualify for economic development or revolving loan fund assistance. And together, all three of these programs provide opportunities for downtown revitalization work. Program year 2019 started on July 1st of 2019. So we're not a full year into our new program structure yet. We have awarded funds for 2 proposals, and there are several others in various stages of review. Our program year 2020 starts July 1 of this year. The target of opportunity, economic development, and revolving loan fund programs are open cycle, and applications are accepted year-round. Our critical infrastructure program has funding rounds, and round 1 applications are due June 17th of 2020. So the Target of Opportunity program is now the primary way we fund downtown revitalization activities. The program has existed for quite a long number of years, and we used to use it as a source of funding for single building rehabilitation projects. When we determined several years ago that our previous downtown revitalization program wasn't yielding the most impactful results, 75% of projects funded required extensions. There were a lot of communities that returned funds because they were not able to expend them within the program deadlines. And a lot of the work that was done were small projects, so some roof repairs, signage, doors, and some code work. But the projects really were not having a significant impact on the building stock in a lot of our eligible downtown communities. We decided to expand the Targeted Opportunity Program, and we increased the budget to handle these downtown requests. Historically, the program was funded at $1 million a year. And starting in 2019, we increased funding, doubled it to $2 million per year, with the downtown revitalization program set aside at $1 million. We continue to look for other initiatives with this program, but in 2020, we're anticipating setting aside another $1 million for downtown revitalization projects. This program can also be used for economic development, community development, and imminent threat projects that do not fit into other funding categories. So a brief overview of this program. The eligible applicants are PY 2019 and PY 2020 direct allocation cities and counties. And as I mentioned at the onset, those are the 78 rural counties and 23 direct cities. In order to qualify as a direct city, the city must have a population of between 15 and 50,000 and a low and moderate income percent, according to the American Community Survey, of at least 30%. Counties are always encouraged to apply on behalf of cities and villages within their jurisdiction. This year, we received quite a few letters of interest from villages. And in some cases, the county officials were not even aware the village had submitted the letter of interest or was interested in applying. And so I want to remind villages and cities that are participating in today's webinar that we would love to have a project funded in your community, but you have to go through your county commissioners in order to qualify for funding and for an application to be submitted on your behalf. The maximum award per community is $250,000. Communities are allowed to use up to $25,000 or 10% of the request for administration. And applications can address work on a maximum of 3 buildings. We also allow some additional funds for soft costs. So we allow up to 10% of the CDBG construction cost per unit to go to things like specific environmental review costs, inspections, and the development of specifications or cost estimates. We expect to fund 4 to 6 projects annually with this program. This is pretty consistent with the number of comprehensive downtown revitalizations we awarded annually under the old program design. And as I mentioned, we have awarded funds to 2 communities so far in 2019, and I believe there are another 4 applications at the full application review stage, and then a number of others in various stages of working through pre-applications and initial conversations with the Office for Funding. There is not a grant ceiling or a floor per building, and I'll talk through an example of how a community may choose to allocate funds in another slide or two. But it's supposed to be about the work that needs to be done in your community and what each building needs to be brought up to a standard that can be used either for redevelopment opportunities or preserving the building structure. So you might see an application with 2 buildings, and one of the buildings might be slated for a $200,000 grant, and the other building might be slated for a grant of $30,000. The projects are required to take place in a designated central business district target area. And if your project is to be qualified under the area Slum and Blight National Objective, and I'll talk through that in a little bit as well, you must have design review standards in place for that business district. And those design review standards must follow the Secretary of the Interior's rehabilitation standards. This program does not require matching funds. So there could be a request where all of the money that's going to building rehabilitation comes from the grant. However, if there is competition or we're having to choose between a number of different applications that have been submitted, we may look to a project that has leverage first. So here's my example. A community comes in with a request of $250,000. It has identified 3 substandard buildings in its central business district, and it chooses to allocate $100,000 to building 1. Of that $100,000, $90,000 will be used for building rehabilitation, and $10,000 will be used to complete the environmental review, develop specifications, prepare cost estimates, and inspect the work that's been done. Building 2, also a $100,000 request. $93,000 will go to rehabilitation. $7,000 will be used for qualifying soft costs. And building 3 will receive $25,000, 24 of which will go for rehabilitation, and $1,000 of which will be allocated for soft costs. Under this scenario, the community will also take the maximum administration request of $25,000 to implement the program. So a little bit more about the national objectives. As I mentioned, this is community development block grant funding that originates from the federal government. And every project we do, whether it's downtown revitalization, community development, or economic development, has to meet one of the CDBG national objectives. For downtown revitalization, we qualify projects under the elimination and prevention of slum and blight. A project may qualify under the area slum and blight designation. And this is for buildings that are in a blighted area. In this case, applicants are required to document that at least 51% of the buildings in the designated target area are substandard. The application will include an inventory form that must be used to document the condition of every building in the target area, including the buildings that will receive CDBG assistance, and those buildings must be substandard. The application will also include a certification that the area qualifies as slum and blight. And under this national objective, CDBG funds are limited to facade improvements and structural and code items. This national objective gives you a lot more flexibility in what kind of work can be done on the buildings in your application. However, there's also a lot more work that's required on the front end as part of the application process. Another option is to qualify your project under the SPOT Slum and Blight National Objective. This designation is for buildings in an area that's not blighted and where applicants cannot document that at least 51% of the buildings in the target area are substandard. This application includes a form to evaluate the condition of the buildings that will receive CDBG assistance, not all of the other buildings in the target area, and those buildings must be substandard. Under this scenario, CDBG funds are limited to items that alleviate public health and safety concerns. And the funding source, HUD, is a real stickler about this requirement. So we look at the scope of work that's proposed at the pre-application stage and make a determination as to whether this project, the proposed work, does qualify as something that will alleviate public health and safety conditions. And if it does not, we will kick the pre-application back to the community and ask them if they can qualify it under the Area Limited Blight National Objective that gives, again, a lot more freedom and flexibility to the type of work that's performed. We also can do some projects under the historic preservation designation. And in this case, buildings have to be documented as historic, so either on the National Register or qualified for. And these projects require that the scope of work is limited to activities that preserve historic building elements. And of course, it goes without saying, the funds must also not take away from the historic designation of the building. And so if it's historic before we put money into the building, it's going to be historic after we put money into the building as well. So a little bit about the application process for this program. There is a pre-application or letter of interest required. We created a form that's available on the Office of Community Development's Technical Assistance website. This form will be reevaluated for this upcoming program year 2020, but I don't expect there to be any substantive changes. The form includes information on what national objective will be met, the addresses of the buildings that are proposed for assistance, the finance mechanism, whether there's a grant or a loan or matching funds involved, and also a draft sources and uses budget table. Since this is truly an open cycle program, there is not a hard or fast deadline to submit these letters of interest to us. However, we usually do review them on a first come, first serve basis. And we also expect to have a number of applications that were submitted in 2019 for which we're not going to have funding and may move those forward to the 2020 budget cycle. And so it's in your best interest, if you're interested in applying, to submit your letter of interest sooner than later. We'll start accepting letters of interest for 2020 in mid-June, and then we'll expect to start reviewing applications in July or in August. So in order to apply, there are a number of application requirements. Documentation of the national objective is key. We also ask communities to submit a map of their target area and a map that shows the location of the building or buildings for which assistance will be requested. There is a participation commitment form from the building owners that are part of the application process. And the commitment form serves to, one, document a commitment of any match equity or loan funds that the building owner is bringing to the project. It also serves as a commitment for them to participate in the program. If a building owner drops out after the grant funds are awarded, it is unlikely we will allow the community to apply those funds to another building unless the community is interested in expanding the scope of work for another building that's already been included in their application. We ask that the applications include a preliminary scope of work. We ask for cost estimates that are calculated with federal prevailing wage, and this federal prevailing wage applies to not only the element of the project that will be funded with the community development block grant dollars, but every item that's been identified in the application scope of work. And something else that is new as of 2019 and important, we require all work to be completed by a third-party contractor. So the building owner must go through the private procurement process to obtain bids or obtain quotes, and building owners are not allowed to do the work themselves with in-kind or donated labor. We will not allow an application where the CDBG funds have been requested to just fund materials and the work will be done by the building owner. Application requirements continued. We do ask for some sort of documentation of administrative capacity. So the applicant community must identify who will administer the project at the time of application. There are, because this is federal funding, there is a required environmental review process. And so there's a form to document intended compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act. And then we also do a floodplain review. We are not permitted to assist buildings that are in the floodway. We can provide funding for buildings that are in the floodplain, but there are additional steps required in the environmental review process if that's the case. We also look at a project's readiness to proceed. So the work should be ready to start soon after we award the funds. We look for evidence of site control either through a deed or a lease so that we can document the entity that signed the building commitment form actually has control and is able to go forward with the work that's proposed. There has to be a conditions form that surveys the conditions of the building. Again, spot, slum, and blight, it's just the buildings that will receive CDBG assistance. Area, slum, and blight, it's every single building in the target area. And then we want to see photos of the buildings that are going to be approved, and if the building is historic, documentation of the building's historic designation. We've been fairly happy, I think, this year with the application documents we've received. And so I do not anticipate there will be any changes to the application documents, either in way of template forms or the types of information that we're requiring communities to submit at the time of application. So with that, I want to spend a few minutes talking about our critical infrastructure program. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we are conducting, the Office of Community Development is conducting a webinar scheduled for April 29th in the afternoon to talk about our community development program. And as part of that webinar, we will be spending a lot more time on the critical infrastructure program and what kind of projects will qualify and what kind of application documents are required. However, even though this program is primarily designated for infrastructure in residential areas that meet the low and moderate income national objective, we are able to do central business district infrastructure programs with this fund. So the infrastructure must be in critical or poor condition, and the application must document that even though the infrastructure is in the central business district, it has an impact on the residents of that community. So a quick overview of the program. The eligible applicants are the same applicants that are eligible for the Target of Opportunity Downtown Revitalization Fund. That's the 78 rural counties and 23 small cities. We also encourage counties to apply on behalf of cities that don't qualify and villages for this program. The maximum award is $500,000. There's also an administration allowance of $30,000 or 10% of the CDBG request, whichever is less. And communities must bring at least 10% of the CDBG request to the table as leverage. We also require these projects to be ready to proceed. So if there's design work required or a permit to install, that has to be in place prior to application to our office. These funds are designated for high priority, single purpose public facilities projects. The majority of projects are infrastructure projects. However, we have seen a few public facilities. For example, we assisted with a fire station in one community, and that fire station did happen to be in the community's downtown. The infrastructure must be in critical or poor condition. We do a lot of streets projects, water, sanitary sewer, flood and drainage, some sidewalks, some bridges. The application must demonstrate that the infrastructure has failed or is in the process of failing. And again, it has to be primarily residential benefits. So for example, in a central business district, we could assist with a project where there are frequent water line breaks in the central business district that cause water to pond and freeze in cold months, and that freezing ponding water negatively impacts residents to use the services of the central business district, especially if there's something like a post office or a government building or a place where they're going to need to go frequently to receive benefits. There's also a pre-application process required for this program. For projects in the central business district, they must qualify under the area slum and blight national objective, like your building rehabilitation project. And there's a similar certification process in which the community will evaluate the condition of all of the infrastructure in the central business district target area and must demonstrate that at least 51% of that infrastructure is substandard to qualify. For this program, funds are awarded in rounds. It's not a true open cycle program. And so round one applications are due June 17th of 2020. Because there's a pre-application requirement, June 1st of 2020, June 1, 2020 is the deadline to submit a letter of interest for round one consideration. We start taking letters of interest in May, so we'll say May 1st of 2020. And depending on how our funding holds out through the fiscal year, we may have 2 rounds, we may have 3 rounds, it just depends. And so communities that are not able to get their pre-application into us between May 1st and June 1st may want to look out for a second or third funding round later in the year. And this letter of interest must include a description of the project, designation of the criticality of the infrastructure. So is it critical, is it poor, what's the condition it currently is, a draft sources and uses budget, and again, what national objective it will meet. One other thing that's a little bit different about this program is that applications are scored against each other and ranked, whereas the targeted opportunity program, it's a little bit more of a first come, first serve. If you're in the door and your application's complete and you meet all of the program requirements, that's how you move forward for funding. You're not necessarily scored against other communities submitting targets of opportunity applications. We've also made some significant changes to our scoring system for critical infrastructure. The intent behind the program has not changed, and the way we review applications has not changed. However, we really want to spend a lot more of the money on projects that are critical and impact the identified benefit area. And so we have reduced the number of points that go to communities that are considered to be distressed. We still look at the low and moderate income percent of the service area and the infrastructure owners LMI percent. And this is true even for projects in the central business district where they're qualified under one national objective, but we still use LMI as a distress determination. We are putting a lot more emphasis on the community's administrative plan and capacity to carry out the project successfully. And in this, we look for past performance, not only with community development programs, but also all of the programs the Office of Community Development administers. And then we look for the quality of the application as well. And then we're really focusing on program design. So how critical the project is, what kind of impact is it going to have, is it ready to proceed, and looking again at capacity to move the program forward. One of the other things we're focusing more and more on is supporting documentation. And so it's really not enough for a community to tell us the project is critical and the project will have a great impact. The community needs to demonstrate that through supporting documentation, whether it's findings and orders from the Environmental Protection Agency, or a letter from the fire chief, or some other third-party documentation to help us understand how critical the project really is. And then finally, communities can use our economic development and revolving loan fund programs to do work in their central business districts. We do not do many downtown projects with this program, but we can and we have. For example, we funded a restaurant in downtown Medina. We used funds for building rehabilitation and helped the business buy kitchen equipment, and a new restaurant business creating jobs for low and moderate income persons was developed in downtown Medina. Years ago, we also assisted a project in the city of Washington Courthouse. It was a florist shop, and the business leased the building from an out-of-town landlord. The building owner put the building up for sale, and we helped the business buy the building, which enabled them to retain the jobs they had currently and also expand hours to create a few new jobs for persons of low and moderate income. And so the keys with this program is that it is a loan program. Funds must be repaid. The funds are used for fixed asset financing, so everything from building acquisition to building rehabilitation to items that are used to operate the business in that building. The funds, when they're repaid, are not repaid to the state of Ohio. They're repaid to the community in which the project takes place. And so when I talk a little bit about the revolving loan fund next, this is what establishes a community's revolving loan fund. The key here is that the project must create or retain permanent private sector jobs for persons of low and moderate income. And then there are a number of other program requirements. There's a leverage requirement, there's a distress requirement, which are all outlined in our consolidated plan, which is also available on the agency's website. And then finally, there are a number of communities that maintain CDBG originated revolving loan funds. And this is a really flexible source of money if your community is fortunate enough to have one. The fund can be used for any community development block grant eligible activity. So focusing specific on downtown revitalization, communities will use these funds to do private rehabilitation projects. They will use these funds to do streetscape infrastructure, sidewalks, planters, traffic lights, other sorts of street improvements. And some communities will use this money to do downtown planning. And so we've had communities come in to do a feasibility study for redevelopment of a downtown building, or to help a community develop a strategic or comprehensive plan for that downtown's future. So this process also requires an application. It's really a waiver where you will submit some of the same documentation we've talked about for other applications, but we're looking to see that the project meets the CDBG national objective and that you've got cost estimates and that it's something that we can give you the green light to move forward. And so if you have a revolving loan fund and you're interested in using some of the money for downtown revitalization, you simply need to contact us and figure out what kind of waiver process you need to go through, and we will give you approval to use that money to do downtown revitalization. So with that, this is me. And I think we are going to open it up for questions.
Thanks, Mary. Yes, so if you have any questions, please type them into your chat boxes now. We're going to take a short commercial break to give you a few seconds to write those in. So thank you for attending today's webinar. If you enjoyed today's webinar, please think about becoming a member of Heritage Ohio. You can do that both on our website and through our mail service. To announce a couple upcoming events, our next webinar is on April 8th, 1 o'clock as well, and that is going to be on 3 tools to effectively manage any project, and that's going to be with Bevan Farron of Work Collaborate, and that is going to be open for all public and Heritage Ohio members as well. Our next event coming up is on April 22nd. That's going to be in Troy, Ohio, and that's going to be our Economic Vitality Workshop. And finally, coming up on June 11th, our design workshop is going to be in Wellington. You can find more details on those 2 workshops on our website, www.heritageohio.org. All right, let's get the little things stretched, maybe stretch a few. All right, first question. Get all the way up to the top here. Could soft costs be reimbursed to the building owner to have cost estimates and building conditions completed for their application?
So I guess you're talking about a scenario in which the building owner has already paid to have a cost estimate developed and to do their building condition survey. Generally, a soft cost that we are talking about here is for the development of a scope of work or an estimate that's post the application and approval. However, we do allow for administration costs to be reimbursed that have been incurred prior to application. And so I think we could look into what costs the building owner has incurred and to see whether that is reimbursable. Again, we allow up to 10% of the CDBG award per building to be used. And so it's not going to be a lot of money for a lot of the projects that we're seeing, but we can do some digging around to make sure the regs do not prohibit us from reimbursement, and it's something we'd be happy to get back to you on.
Our next question is, does the ODSA website provide full detail on all of the application requirements that were listed on the slide?
So we actually have a checklist, and the checklist is on the technical assistance website. The checklist, there's a separate checklist for each of the programs we administer. So there's one for critical infrastructure, and there's one for the targets of opportunity, and it will list out the name of the exhibit, whether there are instructions or a template form that's required to be used, and when that attachment's required. So for example, you're going to have a different attachment required for area slum and blight than you will spot slum and blight. But yes, there is a checklist, and it is on the agency's technical assistance website.
Thank you, Mary. Jennifer has a question here. If we are in a city that receives funds through the state of Ohio, are we still able to apply through the county for a downtown revitalization or a Targets of Opportunity grant?
You are. So the nice thing about communities, cities that receive funding directly is they have options. They can either ask the city government to submit an application, or they can have the county commissioners submit one on their behalf. And so for those 23 direct cities, they have multiple options, city or county, either one's acceptable to us.
Now we have a very important question for many of these grants here. Could you please clarify what qualifies as a non-entitlement community?
Yes, so the 78 rural counties, it's everything, and I'm going to leave one out, so I probably shouldn't try to list them, but essentially it's every county that is not Dayton, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo, Canton, Akron, and the city of Warren. So if you are in, Warren County, the city of Warren, actually Trumbull County is one of ours. The Warren County is not. So the 78 rural counties, and there is a map posted to our technical assistance website as well. So you can look at that for yourself and determine whether you qualify. And then the 23 direct cities are cities that have a population of between 15 and 50,000 and a low and moderate income percent of at least 30, according to the American Community Survey.
Thanks, Mary. Our next question is asking about a project here. So if a community is in the process of renovating their courthouse, which is in the middle of the CBD, could the community include project costs in their downtown application?
So courthouses are a whole nother story. Community development block grant funds are strictly prohibited from assisting with any project that's considered to be the general conduct of government. And so the only work that we could ever do at a county courthouse would be something for compliance with the American Disabilities Act. But if you are submitting an application for either a target area or a specific building, leverage is not required. And so we would not ask you to look for documentation or commitments of other work going on in the downtown to try to bolster your application for a building that's not part of your application. And so the answer is no, but the answer is also that you're not going to need to have that leverage to qualify for funding.
Our next question from Sandy is, could costs associated with bidding out the downtown project be included in the soft costs?
Yes, that's exactly what the soft costs are supposed to do. So anything that is building specific, if you have to do a tier 2 environmental review where you're having to look at asbestos removal, or you're having to coordinate with the Ohio Historic Preservation Office, that's a building specific environmental review cost. If you are developing specifications or going out to bid, that's a building specific procurement or contract management costs. So yes, all of those things are exactly what the soft costs are designed to handle.
Now we have a couple questions on revolving loan funds. Could you explain the difference between a community development revolving loan fund and an economic development revolving loan fund?
So there actually are two different types of revolving loan funds. One of them is economic development and the other is housing. The cool thing is, if either your economic development or your housing revolving loan fund are funded with community development block grant, you can use either one of them to do community development projects. The difference simply is that if it's an economic development project or a housing project, those funds typically will revolve because the deals are structured where there is some sort of repayment requirement. Communities do not have community development revolving loan funds because those funds are simply granted to undertake community development projects. And so two different types, economic development and housing, but you can use either one of those funds for community development if CDBG rather than home is your funding source.
And sort of related to that, this one I'm sure is a very long answer with a very good summary attached to it. How does a community launch an economic development revolving loan fund?
Yeah, so you have to have a project that qualifies for our economic development program, which was on the second to last slide. And the short version of the answer is that you will have a company that is undertaking an expansion project, or a new business has come into your town. That business needs assistance with fixed asset financing. And so you will apply to us for a grant to assist that business rather, buy machinery and equipment, build a building, renovate a building, do site work. We give your community a grant. Your community makes a loan to that company, and that company pays the money back. You keep that money, and that's your economic development revolving loan fund.
Thanks, Mary. Here's a question about how economic development revolving loan funds are used. So if a city's economic development revolving loan funds are used for a downtown project such as private rehabilitation with fixed asset financing, are there funds to be repaid to the ROF?
So really it depends on how you structure your project. If your community chooses to structure assistance in the form of a loan, then yes, it does have to be paid to your community development block grant revolving loan fund, and it will retain all of the federal strings that community development block grant funding requires. However, you can choose to grant the money to do a private rehabilitation project. And if that's the case, you make a grant, you pay the contractor, or you reimburse your building owner for the work that was done. And it's a grant, and it's not repaid to anyone, anywhere, at any time.
Our next question here is, are there grants through your office that can be specifically used to tear down buildings and to do land-related remediation within a business district area?
Maybe. So back on that first target of opportunity slide, I showed that the funds could be used for economic development, community development, downtown revitalization, and imminent threat projects. And we could potentially work with the community to do demolition. We have used funding to demolish residential properties. We've used funding to demolish commercial and industrial properties. The key here is, though, that because we really are a program to preserve downtown building stock, we're going to have to do a lot of analysis and evaluation if we have a request from a community to use these dollars to tear down a building in the central business district. Obviously, the Ohio Historic Preservation Office has to be involved. And so the answer is, in theory, yes. In practice, there's a lot more involved.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, we got some project-specific questions here. All right. So the first project is a specific building in the midst of our downtown that desperately needs rehab. It has had a private owner, and I would like to incentivize this owner with some funding assistance that might help them fix up the building. What do I do to find out if there is any program we might qualify for?
So my first suggestion would be to talk to your county's community development director. And if you are unsure as to who that is, or you need assistance from my office to broker that conversation, we would be happy to help. But first steps would be to talk to your community development director at the county level and let them know that you're interested in requesting some funding or working with the state to access grant dollars to help with the downtown private rehabilitation project. And then they can either reach out to me, or again, the three of us can talk and see if you qualify for funding through this target of opportunity program. We also have a number of other pots of money that may be an appropriate fit, and we can explore those scenarios as well.
Thanks, Mary. Our next project related question here is, this person is the owner of a locally significant but not a nationally significant historic building from the 1890s in a depressed area that needs roofing and windows. It's about 10 minutes from downtown Toledo. Would this building qualify, not being exactly in a historic downtown area?
So 2 thoughts or 2 responses. First and foremost is that if the building is in the city of Toledo limits, even if it's not in downtown Toledo, you're going to need to talk to the city of Toledo to see how it uses its community development block grant dollars, and if the city has a similar program or a similar fund that can do private rehabilitation. If your building's not in the city of Toledo, even though it's in close proximity, Lucas County is one of the 78 rural counties that qualifies for this program. And we could, again, broker a conversation with the parties that are involved with this building and the Lucas County commissioners and community development staff to see whether we could do something. But no, it does not necessarily have to be in a historic district for us to assist.
All right, our next question is, would the downtown grants cover sidewalks?
No. So that's why I also spent some time this afternoon talking about our critical infrastructure program. Our downtown revitalization program is building rehabilitation only. Critical infrastructure could potentially be used for sidewalks in the downtown if the community can demonstrate they're in critical or poor condition, and that condition is impacting the residents of that community from being able to access necessary services in the downtown.
And circling back to a question we had a few moments ago about the courthouse, would this change if the courthouse was being leveraged for the businesses?
So again, no leverage is required. So there would be no need to attempt to include the courthouse in any sort of application your community would structure for assistance.
All right. And for the target of opportunity grant, can you repeat the LMI requirement?
So there's actually not a low and moderate income requirement for the downtown target of opportunity grant. Everything we do with that program is through the prevention and elimination of slum and blight. That's one of 2 CDBG national objectives. Low and moderate income benefit is the other one. We simply do look at LMI as a measure of distress if we're doing something with our critical infrastructure program in the central business district. And again, that program's competitive. You're competing against other communities with other projects. And so distress is always a factor in determining who gets a very small, finite, limited amount of money.
All right, we have a few more questions here. Just to give you guys one heads up that we'll be taking our final questions in a few moments. So if you have any final questions, please type those in now. I've seen a few questions pop up about availability of this presentation. 2 things. First, if everything worked correctly today, you should see a handouts button on your user panel for GoToWebinar. Included in that is a PDF of the slides of today. And also you will be receiving an email about an hour from now with a link to the video recording of today's webinar. And also we'll be posting it to YouTube within the next day or so as well. So be on the lookout for those. All right, our next question, sort of as a point of clarification, how does a community launch a revolving loan fund program and apply to use those funds?
So two different questions. If your community does not currently have an economic development revolving loan fund and you're looking to do some downtown planning, I would suggest either looking at a target of opportunity application that is not where you'd be coming into the Office of Community Development with a target of opportunity application specifically for planning. My other suggestion would be to talk to your either city or county to see if you have access to community development funds, allocation funds, and could set aside a small amount of that money to do planning. So the time it would take and the business opportunity it would take to launch a revolving loan fund, a lot of it is luck of the draw when you've got a company that's ready to expand. Timing is everything. And so if you're looking to do some downtown planning now, there are other ways to go about it. And I would suggest reaching out to me and I can get you some ideas as to where to look for money.
Thanks, Mary. Our next question, could you use TOP funds to build out a restaurant in the Central Business District target area?
Our preference is to use our economic development program because you're going to have a job creation component with a restaurant build out project. And so because we put a lot more money into economic development than we do targets of opportunity, if you've got a project that could go either direction, we're always going to send you to the economic development program first. And if you've got a project where you've got an identified business and there's going to be a source of revenue, then we're going to want to do that as an economic development project and have those funds paid back rather than issuing a grant to do a build out for a new business.
Steve has a question about Richwood. So in Richwood, in Union County, it's a historic town that has a town hall, fire station, and an opera house in one building. It has been used in about 10 to 15 years. It is in substantial need of repairs. In order to save, repair, and renovate the building, it would be about $2 to $3 million in estimates. Are there any DSA dollars available for such a project?
Maybe. So this would be a potential request through that target of opportunity program. If the building is used as a town hall, which I'm interpreting as to, well, you said unused for 10 to 15 years. So assuming that means that the building is vacant and there's nothing going on there right now, we could potentially do a target of opportunity program. Yours would be one where rather than having 1 or 2 or 3 buildings, it would be a 1 building project. You'd be capped at $250,000 minus administration. And obviously there would have to be a lot of fundraising to come up with the balance of the $2 to $3 million. But yes, this could be something we would look at through our target of opportunity program.
Thank you, Mary. Looks like there are no further questions. So thank you, Mary, for being with us today. And thank you, everyone, for attending our webinar. We hope you can join our next webinar on April 8th, and we hope to see you then. Thank you very much and have a good day.